Good evening. This is Altazar, welcoming you to tonight's presentation, Astrology Revealing Healing Issues and Your Life Purpose. So tonight's presentation is part of my ongoing series of descriptions and explanations of astrology, and I'm going to wait a moment to see if we have anyone who's going to be coming online here before we proceed with this discussion. I have several monitors here, so you'll see me looking from here to there, and I'm in the process of making adjustments, but I hope you will continue to watch as I improve my lighting and my cameras and my microphones. So all these things have been worked on, and so let's begin this discussion. Tonight we are going to go beyond the simplified entertainment category of astrology that Western society has allowed for astrology, and talk about the deeper spiritual significance of what real astrology is about, and how it came about to be derived over thousands of years as an incredible tool for self-discovery. So I'd like to mention that why has Western society marginalized astrology as it has, especially in the United States, much more than anywhere else in the Western world? Well, this is due to a couple of factors. Welcome, April. This is due to the fact that false superstition and fear have been mainly propagated by certain pluralities of dogmatic, self-righteous Christians. And this is not to denigrate the Christian religion in the least, but certain sects of the Christian religion in the United States have really taken out of context from the Bible a way of making astrology either irrelevant or negative. So astrology has been marginalized to become, in at least the media, the basis for character and personality descriptions, such as if you're a Libra, you're going to be socially active, gracious, artistically inclined, or if you're a Pisces, you're going to be rather deep and sensitive and spiritual, or at least musical and artistic in an ethereal way. Or if you're a Gemini, you might be somebody who's quite talkative and communicative. So these are the acceptable, entertainment-oriented character descriptions. The other part of astrology, as it's been marginalized in this society, is the horoscopes we read in the Boulder Weekly and the newspapers and magazines. Now you'll see tonight, after we go through this exposition, that astrology is a much deeper and much more complex exposition of each person's unique astrology chart based on their birth date, location, and even more specifically, a person's birth time. And what you're looking at here is the chart, the astrology chart of Mahatma Gandhi, based on his birth date, time, and location. So tonight we are featuring the chart of Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., and we may even draw on a real negative perspective associated with the chart of Adolph Hitler. But the point of tonight's presentation is to especially give those of you, even those of you who have had an astrology chart made, or especially those who've never had an astrology chart made, a true sense of what spiritual astrology is all about, and how it, as a tool by a well-trained and professional astrologer can be an incredible guideline and part of the package that a person uses to discern the deeper attributes and qualities of their soul growth, their personal growth, and healing issues. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about my background. I've been an astrologer for over 25 years. Why did I get into astrology, and why do I do these kinds of readings? Well, part of the reason that this foundation reading, what we call life purpose reading, is because I didn't have a clue who I was or what my real purpose was in this life, or even a deep sense that there was a true kind of spirituality beyond just traditional religion. So I have, over the past 25 or more years, studied the ancient interpretations of one's astrology chart through the Vedas and Vedic astrology, through the Buddhist wisdom associated with karma and reincarnation. Chinese astrology, as it gives an exposition of and summary of a person's character qualities and life expression, based more on the spiritual side of their soul journey. I've also studied Western metaphysics, which also has included psychology as part of the enhanced understanding of personality, character, and the spiritual growth issues that each person is called to discern. In fact, I have many psychotherapists who consult me to get a much more rapid and distinct appraisal of what is the psychological block or blocks that a client may have, which I may be able to determine in 10 to 20 minutes looking at their astrology chart, which could take as much as 6 months of interview therapy. So, I'd also like to mention a little bit about my work experience. I have a bachelor's degree in organizational psychology from the University of California in Berkeley. I have been a vocational counselor and admissions representative for several vocational colleges, in which eventually I became director of admissions. And part of the reason I became director of admissions was because I was able to note the birth dates of many of the students who were applying to the school and help guide them more correctly towards their choice of vocation or major due to knowing their astrology simply based on their birth date, which gave me one of the highest records of enrollment as well as retention in the school. So these are all aspects of the issues associated with astrology that are much deeper than the Western entertainment point of view. So I'd like to welcome Jeb and Kimberly. So we're now going into discussing what is an astrology chart. There may be some of you here who have never had a chart made, and some who have but don't really know what it's indicating. So we're going to put up a chart here and be able to see what it's indicating, or at least what the basis of a chart is. And I'm going to bring up the chart of Martin Luther King Jr. And we're going to note here, I'm going to get a little more focus to bring that chart a little closer. There we go. So hopefully you can see that a little better. So what we are looking at in a chart is all the planetary positions that existed on January 15th, 1929, the year that Martin Luther King Jr. was born. And this chart is also based on his time of birth. I'm not indicating that on the display, and also his location of birth. So those three factors give the most accurate astrology chart. However, just your birth date alone can reveal a good 80% of the important information. So I'm not going to teach a class here on astrology tonight. I just want to demonstrate briefly what an astrology chart is indicating and its complexity before we get into talking about Martin Luther King Jr. and why he was who he was and why Gandhi was who he was. So let's take a look. So you see here, this is Martin Luther King Jr.'s sun sign at 25 degrees Capricorn. So there's actually 30 different types of Capricorns, 30 different types of Leos. There's 30 degrees per sign. So this shows you that you can't write a generalization or a horoscope or a description of all Leos or Capricorns or any other sign just as a simplification that's done in the West. So the planet tells us what quality we're looking at. The sun tells us fundamentally your identity expression, the calling of what you're here to evolve in this lifetime. Mercury, for example, is symbolic of how you may tend to communicate, your intellectual capabilities, your style of day-to-day scheduling and relations in terms of work and organization, as well as how you might relate to certain relatives and people in your immediate locality. So the planet tells us what quality we're looking at, and each planet represents a different quality. For example, Venus represents how you may express your feelings through romantic expression, what your values are for lifestyle in a relationship, how you may approach your finances and your monetary issues. Now, so we have the planet, what quality, and how that is expressed. So Martin Luther King Jr. has Mercury in the sign Aquarius. And so how does he communicate? What's his orientation for intellectual development? Mercury in Aquarius is someone who is oriented towards social humanitarian activism, someone who's inclined to understand the multi-dimensions of the political, economic, and sociological dimensions of society. Well, that does apply to Martin Luther King Jr. So we have the planet, what quality? Mercury, the sign it's in, he manifests that in Aquarius. Another Capricorn might have Mercury in Pisces, and that would make them much more shy and sensitive and more introspective or ethereal and spiritual and in an introspective way. So planet, what quality, sign it's in, and how that's manifest. Then we have the planet in a sign in a house. You see these 12 segments of the chart. They're called houses. If you may recall that classic tune from the 1960s, when the moon is in the 7th house and Jupiter lines with Mars, from the show Hair. The houses tell us where in life this person is meant to manifest or inclined to manifest the symbolism of that planet. Well, Martin Luther King Jr. has it in the 10th house, the house of public service, the house of affecting, in a macroistic sense, large pluralities of people in society. Wow, that goes to describe the impact of someone who has a 10th house sun, or Mercury, is here to be a very public person. Not necessarily a great celebrity per se, but even Donald Trump has his sun in the 10th house. See, so the house tells us where in life. These houses are different areas of life. The second house is the house of money, business, and finance, and your deeper values. The third house is intellectual development, local dynamics with your community, and dynamics with relatives and people in your local environment. The seventh house is the house of marriage and long-term partnerships. Now, just because a person doesn't have a specific planet in one of the houses doesn't mean that area of their life is vacant or doesn't exist. Martin Luther King Jr. was married, as we know, Coretta Scott King. However, that's, for some people, marriage might be a very strong and important emphasis in their soul growth. Whereas for Martin Luther King Jr., the emphasis for his soul growth was to become a public person who would impact society with a social humanitarian message. So we have the planet, we have the sign it's in, that's what quality, how it's manifest, where in life it tends to be manifest in terms of the 12 houses. And we have, lastly, these lines you see here. Let's see if on the screen you can see them. Here's a red line, here's a green line, there's an orange line. Those are the angles between the planets. So the angles, or what we actually call aspects, are the karma, the deepest sense of karma in terms of the quality that that planet represents. Now what I mean by that, karma, is to what extent a person has favorably evolved that dynamic. We'll pick on Mercury, Martin Luther King Jr.'s Mercury in Aquarius. He has that at a 60-degree angle to the planet Uranus. What that means, a 60-degree angle, or what we call a sextile, is an angle or an aspect of someone who has worked at and evolved their, in this case, communications, intellectual ability in a group, organization, and or social, humanitarian, or political context. So that would imply in this lifetime he would have a natural instinct to evolve his intelligence to be used in the context of discerning in society where there is injustice and how he can best communicate to ameliorate and liberate associated with that injustice. So these are things that we see when we do a life purpose reading in a person's chart. So that's our brief introduction to astrology technicalities. I just want to point out that if we were to look at all the factors, that's these 12 planetary bodies and all the degree positions that they're in the houses, that each individual actually consists of 72 factors that go into uniquely describing who you are and why you're here and what you're here to heal. Now that's what we're going to get into next. But before I do that, let's see if we have any other guests here tonight. So far we're doing quite well. So what I'm now going to give you is the spiritual basis for this interpretation. There are many astrologers out there who are, trying to wheel and deal their way into doing interpretation, and the deepest way to discern and become an astrologer is to have a spiritual path. And so, in my case, I have explored the Vedic point of view through the Hindu path. I have explored the Buddhist interpretation of karma and reincarnation. I studied with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, the founder of Naropa, back in the 80s. I've explored Christian mysticism and as well Egyptian mysticism. So Chinese astrology and its ancient wisdom, as well as Western psychology. So the ultimate interpretation of charts that I do is based on this perspective, garnered from these studies, that life is a school in which we're here to evolve our consciousness to higher and higher levels of awareness of the meaning of spiritual laws and principles that, when inculcated in our attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, yield greater and greater levels of harmony, happiness, peace of mind, prosperity, and loving relationships in our lives. It's said that we live many lifetimes, or what's known as reincarnation. And you don't have to agree with this point of view to hear this information or even have a reading, because if you have a reading, it should confirm and affirm what you already know about yourself to a certain extent, but on a much deeper level. At any rate, it is said that we live many lifetimes, and during those lifetimes, we generate what's known as karma. So karma means cause and effect. In essence, why is Martin Luther King Jr. who he is? In other words, everything I briefly told you, and even more so as we get into tonight's discussion about his Mercury position or his sun sign or him possibly becoming a public figure impacting the socioeconomic humanitarian dynamics of society, I could have said 1 minute after he was born. In other words, I'd have his birth date, time, and location. I could have made this chart and a recording and described those things. And in fact, I've been doing this for over 25 years. I have done the charts of many newborn babies for their parents so that they could, at an early age and through their childhood, understand who the soul is who's coming through them and cultivate the skills, talents, and abilities that would best enhance what is their life purpose. So this is the deeper dimension of what a life purpose reading is. So at any rate, during our lifetimes, the extent to which we have been in attunement with spiritual laws and principles, and for those of you who are relativists or atheists or don't believe in that there are guidelines to being a loving person, if you have an astrology life purpose reading, you will see that there is a truth to spiritual laws and principles that, when aligned and attuned to, yield your gifts, talents, natural abilities, as well as positive attraction to socioeconomic, education, and relationship resources in this life. And the extent to which one, either out of their ego or self-will, or simply out of ignorance, have violated these spiritual laws or principles in prior lifetimes, is the extent to which they may come back in this lifetime with blocks, frustrations, or difficulties that they are hopefully going to get out of denial about and discover and or find the spiritual practices or behavioral modes for their own attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors that are the healing and antidote and source of progress for their soul growth. So I'm talking about, people can draw on like the 10 Commandments, you shouldn't steal, or you shouldn't kill, or you shouldn't commit adultery. These are, in fact, some spiritual laws. Now, why is that? Because I'm into experiential astrology. I have a Bachelor of Science degree. When I first got into this, I needed proof that this is for real. Well, your astrology chart indicates to what extent one has been out of the principles that lend towards being a loving and harmonious and peaceful person. And that's what the universe is attempting to coax us towards in our soul growth. So it's not just about, it's a good thing to, not steal from somebody or be a greedy person. But in fact, we can see in certain people's astrology chart, for example, like Donald Trump's, that they have prior lifetimes of being greedy and or not deeply a loving person. Now, some rather greedy people have complex charts and can be quite wealthy in this life, yet be very unhappy. But there are other greedy people who their chart shows that kind of greed or exploitation, in which they come into this life and find that their house is always being broken into, or they seem to attract salespeople who are swindlers, and or find that people use them for their material means or resources rather than caring about them as a person. So karma means we get back what we put out. And one's astrology chart does reveal that. And so it's a very direct way to get a handle on how to become more forgiving in one's life, especially when encountering troubling and objectionable people or circumstances. And especially the degree to which one has suffered or had difficulty with their parents. But we're going to get on to this dynamic here and go more specifically into demonstrating the charts of Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi. And this discussion tonight is also about life purpose. In other words, how do people discover their life purpose? You know, I have been a counselor and a consultant for over 25 years, and my primary reading is the life purpose reading. And so people have a life purpose reading because many people have sold themselves out for the sake of security or money and have not really honored the depth of their soul and the passion they might have for a certain creative self-expression. So just to give you an example of someone who went through the transformation, these weren't clients, but they're an example. Ben and Jerry's ice cream. Ben and Jerry were computer programmers. They could have been, you know, they were making six figures, you know, in the computer age, you know, as it was evolving back in the 80s and 90s. And yet, they loved in their free time to make wacky forms of ice cream. And so, you know, do what you love and the money will follow is another slogan. They followed their passion and created an ice cream company with, you know, Jerry Garcia or Cherry Garcia ice cream and all sorts of wacky flavors and names. So many clients I've had have, you know, gotten to the point where they've been so depressed and were lost in their 30s, 40s, or 50s, and they have a life purpose reading, and then they see, oh, this is what I'm about. And it's true, I do kind of like these things, or I have this style of interest, and yet I haven't honored that because I've been more about taking a job for the money or the security, or just looking in the classified ads to see, you know, where I might be able to find a job. So this is part of why people pursue a life purpose reading. So let's get into looking at the chart of Gandhi. And one thing that people appreciate in this discussion is understanding why certain people are who they are. And I've had a passion for that because, you know, I got into astrology because I really didn't understand who I was, and it took all these years of exploration to understand myself, and then I realized that's the gift I'm here to give others. So the chart of Gandhi. Let's see how we're looking here on camera. When I approach a life purpose chart, first thing we look at is just the day of the week a person is born. So Gandhi is born on a Saturday. I wonder how many of you know what day of the week you were born in. Each day of the week is symbolic of a fundamental theme of your identity expression in this life. Saturday is Saturn Day. It correlates with the planet Saturn and the symbolism of Saturn. And Sunday is the sun, Monday is Moon Day, Tuesday is Mars Day, etc. Friday is Venus Day. So when a person's born on Saturn Day, that implies that they are here to pursue a life that involves great challenge, the need to go through many trials and tribulations that build skill, achievement, and character. And through that search, through that exploration, ascend through higher and higher levels of responsibility to the public, provided they have learned their lessons and are moving according to service and ethical principles. Next, we look at the day a person is born, October 2nd. Well, the day a person is born in numerology represents an aspect of the style that they're here to express their identity. And someone born on the second day of the month is here to be someone who is a supportive person, someone who is here to nurture others and or help evolve society, as a guide, and a guide who can be deeply insightful on a spiritual, psychological, or more general political and sociological level. Well, next we're going to look at the fact that 1869, and everyone was born in a specific Chinese year, is the year of the Earth Snake. And so, in Chinese astrology, when one is born in the year of the Earth Snake, that implies that they are one who is here to get grounded. Someone born in the snake, a snake is the most grounded creature you're going to find. Now, when we say grounded, in other words, there's a calling for that soul who might have a karma of having been highly idealistic or impractical in prior lifetimes, and therefore is called in this lifetime to get real and to discern their values and get together an awareness of their practical skills, talents, and abilities that can be used in a healing capacity or in a business capacity, and be able to bring together the proper resources for an effect in society. So, for those of you who've joined late, this is Altazar. I'm available at my website, www.altazarastrology.com, or you can email me, altazarastrology@gmail.com. I do offer free sample readings for new clients, and I encourage your contact if you even have brief questions regarding this presentation. So, with that said, we're going to move on to talking about, as we're going through here, what is known as a life purpose reading, an exposition of Gandhi's chart as it shows why he was who he was. And I needed to mention that not everyone's here to be a Gandhi. Not everyone's here to be a Martin Luther King Jr. Not everyone here is here to be a Mother Teresa. You know, that this is the kind of a misunderstanding that some idealistic people have, that certainly it's positive to aspire to some of their nature or teachings, but the reason these people are who they were is because they have a unique and specific karma that inclines them to pursue as a passion the accomplishment and achievements that they accomplished, as it also is a joy for evolving their soul growth. That's an important point. Some people are here to just be, a gardener or landscaper, and have another emphasis for their life, which might be their marriage or raising children or a contemplative private spiritual path. So that's why we're going through this. Some of your greatest people, or some with the highest achievement, have some of the most difficult karma, as you're going to see here with Gandhi. So Gandhi is born under a balsamic moon. So what is a balsamic moon? Well, everyone was born under a moon phase. There are 8 phases of the moon in the west. There's the new moon, crescent moon, quarter moon. And so the balsamic moon is the last phase of the moon before the new moon. So everyone has a moon phase. That's part of our interpretation about your character, your quality of expression. Someone with a balsamic moon usually is a very old soul, and someone who has a deep introspective, contemplative consciousness, and usually doesn't make decisions impulsively, and often considers through wisdom or even spiritual guidance their approach and or decisions in the world. Now, even further, in Egyptian mysticism, there is the 28 phases of the moon, and in this case, Gandhi is the 23rd phase. And I'm not going to get into the technicalities of how that's calculated, but it has to do with the distance of his moon from his sun, degree-wise. The archetype of the widowed queen in Egyptian mysticism is that of a soul who has a deep and hard karma, who is here to heal some deep major issues for the progress of their soul. The archetypical image of the widowed queen is a queen who stands on the ramparts of a feudal castle, looking out onto the pastoral areas of the feudal peasantry and town society, and notes a windmill in the distance where a miller is grinding wheat. And the symbolism of that the queen has lost the king has been killed in battle, and the queen is now saddled with this great responsibility to lead her land and her people, and as well make right decisions. So you can see, as I've gone through the themes of Gandhi's life purpose, I haven't even touched into the astrology chart itself yet to talk further. So now we're going to get into talking a bit about that and do a little comparison as well. So I welcome any of you who've just arrived. I'm Altazar, and we're talking about the life purpose chart in astrology and how that is the foundation chart for all astrology readings in terms of understanding the complexities of a person's healing and personal growth issues and karma, and or why we may be who we are in this life. So next we're going to be looking at here the sun sign position. So I shared before that a person's sun sign, and I've done other videos just on the spiritual significance of a person's sun sign. If you go to my homepage on Facebook, you can scroll down and find that video amongst other videos I've done on various topics. The sun sign in Libra is that of someone who is here to find balance, the scales of justice, or the symbol of Libra, and someone who's here to evolve their ability to be tactful, diplomatic, and a participant in the community of society, and as one who can be and or help improve the existence of social justice. And some people who are Libras, like John Lennon of the Beatles, was a lyrical songwriter and artist, and many Libras are appreciative of the arts and the aesthetics and beauty in life, and are meant to demonstrate that. And others are somehow or another connected to the social humanitarian dynamics of social justice. So Gandhi, in fact, was a lawyer. He went to England and went to Oxford, became a lawyer, came from a wealthy Brahmin family, and so he had great opportunity to just simply live an elite upper-class existence, not only in England but elsewhere. Spoke eloquent English as well as his native language. But we note, as I've shared before, that Gandhi's sun sign is in the 12th house of the chart. The 12th house is the house of, in the karmic interpretation, the house of renunciation. What does that mean? Well, when a person has their sun sign or the moon sign in the 12th house, it implies that this is a life of self-denial, or another way to put it is a life of giving to others before self. It's a life of evolving deep awareness of spiritual, ethical, and psychological principles that enhance one's ability to understand others and serve others in hopefully a compassionate context. And interestingly enough, it's the house of retreat. It's the house of monasteries. It's the house of hidden places in society, like hospitals and prisons. And lo and behold, if you know Gandhi's story, and I encourage you to see the movie, Robert Altman's movie about Gandhi with Ben Kingsley. Gandhi spent a good part of his life in prison in the context of defying the authorities of South Africa and the English in India, and becoming the premier advocate and promulgator of passive nonviolent resistance to economic, political, and or religious exploitation. So, why is that? Why would Gandhi choose that life? Let me just add another karmic placement here. Sun sextile Saturn in his chart indicates someone who has understood how to garner a sense of purpose, drive, ambition, hard work in manifesting his identity professionally and or in a leadership capacity of responsibility in prior lifetimes, and would evolve so in this lifetime. Well, to discover why Gandhi became who he was, we look at his Venus and Mars positions, especially his hard karma. Now, people are a mix. This is not a black and white discussion. It's not. You can't get too simplistic when talking about people. And we have our high sides and we have our low sides. And so, the high side of Gandhi, as I've talked about, the leadership, and the Venus, Mars, and Scorpio trining Uranus, shows that he's had many lifetimes of being like I shared about Martin Luther King Jr., been a passionate, intensely passionate person who has been deeply compassionate in the Iranian interpretation of social humanitarian activism. So that's his high side. Now, to talk about the other side, Venus-Mars conjunction in the sign Scorpio that's a challenging karmic placement. So even planets in certain signs represent a positive karma or a negative karma. So the positive side of a Venus, Mars in this section, 16 and 18 degrees Scorpio, is that it correlates with the sign Pisces, which is about a heightened level of compassion and service. The lower side implies an excessive indulgence in sensuality and lust and sexuality. And it also implies one who can be turbulently angered or offended by others and or harbor vindictive resentments and or even act out angrily, vindictively, or potentially violently. So now we look at the other side of that aspect of the Venus-Mars opposite Jupiter-Pluto. Jupiter and Pluto represent higher sides of exploration of spiritual or religious consciousness, as well as economic dynamics in society and the effect on resources. So just in a nutshell, this opposition implies a hard karma of someone who, in some of his lifetimes, not all, may have been a economic, religious, and political terrorist, possibly of the likes of ISIS types, who have had a certain degree of dogmatic rigidity and self-righteous condescension towards those not in agreement with their ideology, and therefore might have even justified violence to persecute or eliminate opposition or difficult challenges. So we can say that, when we look at a chart, we're here to teach what we're here to learn most. So Gandhi's passion in this life is to draw on his high side, the high side of his sensibility, the high side of his care and concern for the righteous service of healing and helping oppressed people, and to transcend the side of himself that would tend to choose violence, negative, angry and vindictive political, economic, or religious ways of encountering and struggling with forces of society. So that's why Gandhi becomes the great teacher of passive nonviolent resistance to political, economic, and religious persecution and exploitation. So everyone has an astrology chart with some kind of issues in those charts, and especially where you can draw on your gifts and talents karmically, but also note where you may have fell off the wagon and again come into this lifetime with challenges in regards to either being a patient person or not being overly egocentric or greedy, or someone who's excessively attached to lust and excessive sensuality and sexual exploitation or serial romances. So there's a whole myriad of aspects of hard karma, and those can be revealed in your life purpose reading. Now I'd like to now look at one last element here. You see on the number 9 here for Gandhi. That's the number, destiny number of the social humanitarian. So everyone has a destiny number. It's going to be 1 through 9, 11, or 22, and it's based on calculating the numbers of your birth date. And that gives us also a kind of symbolic summary of the path you need towards fulfillment in this lifetime. But now we're going to take a quick look at a contrary chart, and that is that of Adolf Hitler. Now, what's interesting about the chart of Adolf Hitler is that, remember, I talked about Gandhi having Venus and Mars in a conjunction in Scorpio. Well, interestingly enough, Adolf Hitler has a Venus-Mars conjunction too. So they both are intense, passionate people who have proclivity towards loving you greatly or hating your guts. What's the difference between Gandhi and an Adolf Hitler? Well, Gandhi, as I showed in his chart, has the high karma of having used his energies in a high spiritual capacity in prior lifetimes, the Venus, Mars, trine, and Uranus. Adolf Hitler, on the other hand, does not have that. In fact, he has very little or no liberating, what we call liberating higher consciousness aspects in his chart. And so what he does have is that Venus-Mars conjunction squaring Saturn in Leo, which is the karma of someone who could potentially be a megalo-egomaniac. That's just Saturn in Leo, potentially. But it's what determines that is the aspect to the other planets. So Venus-Mars conjunction squaring Saturn is someone who would have ruthless ambition towards elevating their stature in the world, and that ruthlessness would be characterized by sadistic forms of violence. This is a classic aspect for someone who might be sadistic or violent. So, we're going to wrap up this discussion tonight and get into look at the chart of Martin Luther King Jr. I can talk for hours, and we're trying to keep this within an hour. I hope those of you who are watching have found this relatively interesting. Those of you who have joined and didn't catch the beginning of this, this will be saved and reposted on the timeline if you're on the Friends. It's also going to be public, so it can be shared with others who aren't friends directly on Facebook, and also found on my homepage in Facebook. So we are now looking at the chart of Martin Luther King Jr. And so here we see sun sign in Capricorn. I've talked about as Mercury in Aquarius, in the house, the 10th house of serving the public at large, or having an impact on the public at large. So that's all well and good. Donald Trump has his son in the 10th house as well. Many world leaders and or corporate executives, or even people who are significant in their community, may have their son in the 10th house. What stands out about Martin Luther King Jr. is, first of all, I'm not going to go through this whole exposition that I did on Gandhi's chart and the themes of his life purpose. Just quickly, he's born on Tuesday, Mars Day. That implies that he's someone who's here to be someone who takes drive and initiative, and is especially someone who personifies a unique mission in life. So Mars people are here to be the proverbial self-starters. We also see this corroborated by the fact that his destiny number is 1. And I've shared before the destiny numbers. When you have number 1 as your destiny number, again, it just affirms the fact that you very likely have been a very accommodating and self-sacrificing person in prior lifetimes. Remember, Gandhi's destiny number was a 9. He's at the other end of the spectrum. So Gandhi had too many lifetimes of a certain obsessiveness with his own egoic-based, self-righteous preoccupation with affecting society. So he'd here to become the social humanitarian in a collective conscience and context through ashrams and other things. Whereas Martin Luther King is here to transcend being overly accommodating to organizations and collectives, to be the pioneer of his own unique mission. Moon phase, crescent moon, that of coping with the day-to-day struggles that people experience in society. The Egyptian moon phase number 4, the warrior priestess, and that's the being who is here with elevated spiritual consciousness, who is here to use moral and spiritual, ethical communications to the world to justify militant activism for ameliorating the conditions of society. And whether those knew it or not, Martin Luther King Jr. was a deep student of the teachings of nonviolent passive resistance taught by Mahatma Gandhi. On the other hand, we see, well, why is he a number 1 in the warrior priestess? Well, he has Venus moon in Pisces in these degrees, and these degrees that are also very favorably aspected. So, and that Venus moon is in this favorable aspect to Pluto. So what that simply means is that Martin Luther King is a deeply evolved soul, deeply spiritual soul, high vibrational soul, has known. Venus in Pisces is considered exalted in the karmic interpretation of things. So Martin Luther King Jr. Is deeply aware, perceptive, sensitive, and compassionate, and has the calling to garner the strength to realize that he is a leader, and not to be too sacrificing for the expectations of others or a common movement, and a leader who can be the advocate to transcend the prejudice, discrimination, and exploitation of the Afro-American people. Well, why is that? Well, Martin Luther King Jr. also has the moon and a square to Saturn and a square to Mars and opposite Mars, opposite Saturn. So, in a nutshell, Martin Luther King Jr. does come from some lifetimes, not the majority, but some lifetimes, in which he has engaged in violent political action, and or political action that has been associated with some degree of prejudice or discrimination. And so in this life, he is here to be the great advocate, the leader of the exploited people who have been oppressed and need confidence, yet sensibility in pursuing a path of non-violence. And yet he died like Gandhi, a violent death. But his legacy, like Gandhi's, has been one of greatness in terms of the fact that he understood why he was here, and he embraced the deeper spiritual dimensions that transcend fear. Do you know that Martin Luther King Jr. had death threats on his life for years before he was eventually assassinated in 1968? For years. And yet, he didn't give up. He had the option to continue persevering on his mission because he knew his mission from a deeper spiritual dimension, God, if you will, that would liberate his own soul as well as be an instrument for the improvement of society. So, we're just about done with our presentation tonight. I would like to just mention here that the reason people do a life purpose reading, and I've been doing this now for close to 25 years, over 25 years actually, since the 1980s, are as follows: that a life purpose reading will affirm and clarify your own personal growth issues. And many people find that if they're still harboring resentment towards one or both of your parents or anyone else from your childhood, it's not a coincidence that you may have experienced some abuse, neglect, abandonment, or other type of tension. And so to hear, and this is what it's done for me, that to hear from an astrologer this interpretation of your chart, which basically describes the kind of parents you might incarnate with in this life, and or relatives, or experience friends or other issues, and yet that could have been described 1 minute after you were born. That, even if you don't believe in reincarnation, it is at least indicating to you that you have certain lessons to learn in this life, and that the only way you're going to get past the blocks associated with resentments and or the hurts, wounds that you may have experienced along your journey in this life is through clearly understanding why you need to forgive. And this is what it's done for me. It has vastly opened myself to great levels of joy, prosperity, and progress. When I heard the things that I heard about my parents and what may have occurred in my childhood, and got out of denial, embraced spiritual and personal growth practices that help liberate me to greater soul growth and peace of mind. I mean, what are we all really looking for? And especially the prosperity that comes from discovering your true life purpose and having a passion for what you do every day, as it's not only for your soul growth, but in fact, that translates towards being a great service to people in the world as well. Lastly, I'll mention that understanding your life purpose contributes to understanding your relationship compatibility with other people, not just a potential lover or spouse. And it also is an excellent tool to understand your parents. Imagine having the charts of your parents done, that many people do once they see in their own chart why they may have had certain parents. And I can see in a life purpose interpretation, people have been so impressed with the fact that I just make their chart, I hear nothing about them. And I can tell them whether their mother or their father may have been an alcoholic, whether they may have had an abandonment wound with one of their parents, whether there may have been abuse issues, whether one or both of their parents may have been dogmatic intellectuals or religiously judgmental. There are many deep, refined facets of one's experience that can be revealed in a life purpose astrology chart. Also, I do child astrology. So to have the chart of your child done and get past the egoic attachment to wanting to make your child who you think they should be, but have the humility to see that the child comes through the parents, they're not from the parents. And to honestly see who and why your child is, why they're here and what they're really here to be about. A child life purpose reading is an incredible revelation and contributes to making much more effective parents. So I thank you all for listening to this presentation, for those of you who are still here or those who have joined late. Again, you are able to visit my website, www.altazarastrology.com, or email me, altazarastrology, all one word, at gmail.com. Blessings to you, and I look forward to hearing from those of you that I can be of service.